My name is Sofia Torres. I am 27 years old. I'm a licensed general contractor, and my brother spent 2 years telling the family he built our grandfather's cabin with his own hands while I was the one who pulled the permits, passed the inspections, and held the tools. Let me describe the cabin, because you need to understand what we're talking about. It's a 3-bedroom property on a lake, a structure my grandfather bought as a wreck 40 years ago and left to the family when he died. By the time we inherited it, it had foundation problems, a roof that had lost 20 years of useful life, plumbing from before I was born, and an electrical panel my grandfather had once described as a fire that hadn't decided to happen yet. It needed a full renovation. It needed someone who knew what they were doing. My brother Marco is 31. He owns a landscaping business and can build a retaining wall and hang a door and has strong opinions about the right way to lay pavers. He is not a licensed contractor. He has never pulled a permit in his life. He does not know what a load-bearing wall is. I found this out when he tried to remove one. I stopped him before anything fell. I am a licensed general contractor. I subcontract structural, mechanical, and electrical work. I know the codes, I know the inspectors, and I know that the difference between a renovation done correctly and one done by someone who watches a lot of online tutorials is the piece of paper that says a licensed professional was responsible for every system in the building. Marco wanted to renovate the cabin himself. He'd been talking about it since the estate was settled. "I'll fix it up," he said, at the first family meeting. "I know what I'm doing. It'll be our project." And I said, "Marco, you need permits for this. You need a licensed contractor on the work." He said, "I know a guy." The guy had never taken the state exam. I checked. So I became the contractor of record. I did it because the cabin needed to be done correctly, and because I was qualified, and because my family had a bad habit of trusting Marco's confidence over my competence. I pulled every permit. I managed every subcontractor. I passed every inspection. My name and license number are on the file at the county building department, as they are required by law to be. Marco bought the lumber. He painted 2 walls. He told the family, at every stage, that he was building the cabin, that this was his project, that he was putting it back together with his own hands. And my family believed him, because Marco is loud and enthusiastic about his work and I am quiet and methodical about mine. Before I tell you what the buyer's inspector found when the family decided to sell, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether someone has ever gotten credit for your work because they were louder about doing it. I want to see how far this story travels. I have to explain what a building permit actually means, because the whole story lives inside it. When structural, electrical, plumbing, or major renovation work is done on a property, it has to be permitted by the local authority. A licensed contractor submits the permit application. Inspectors come out at key stages to verify the work meets code. When the work passes final inspection, the permit closes and the record is filed. That record is public. It stays with the property. When the property is sold, the buyer's inspector and the title search will find every permit ever pulled, and they'll find the name of the contractor who pulled it. It's not a secret. It's the whole point. The permit system exists to protect future owners from buying a building where the walls were moved by someone who didn't know which ones held up the ceiling. My name and license number are on 4 permits for that cabin. Structural foundation repair. Roof replacement. Full plumbing replacement. Electrical panel and rewire. Every major system in that building. My name. My license. My professional liability. My family thought Marco built it. The county building department has always known otherwise. I want to be fair to Marco. He wasn't lying with malice, exactly. He was doing what Marco does, which is occupy the center of a project and speak about it in the first person, and he genuinely convinced himself that managing the experience of being at the cabin while I managed the actual work was the same as doing the work. He bought coffee for the subcontractors. He picked the exterior paint color. He told people he'd been out there every weekend. He had. So had I, plus 3 weekdays and most of a Tuesday where the plumbing inspection got rescheduled twice. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until the family decided to sell. At the end of month 3, when the foundation repair passed inspection, I called my father to tell him and he said, "Marco said it went well." Marco had not been there for the inspection. Marco had driven up that morning, looked at the freshly poured concrete, nodded, and driven home. At the family gathering to celebrate the cabin's completion, Marco gave a toast about 18 months of hard work and learning what you're capable of. I stood at the back with a paper plate and I thought about the 18 months. The permit applications. The subcontractor negotiations. The 6 a.m. inspection appointments. The structural engineer I'd brought in at my own expense when I didn't trust the original assessment. The 3 weeks I'd driven 2 hours each way because the electrical crew needed daily oversight. Hard work. Capability. Mine. And at the first summer the family used the finished cabin, my mother told a neighbor that Marco had basically rebuilt the whole thing from the ground up. The neighbor looked impressed. I was standing right there. I said it came out really well, because that was true, and I drove home. Each moment was warm. Each one shaved a little more of the truth away. By the time the family decided to sell, Marco had told the story so many times that he'd fully inhabited it, he genuinely believed himself, which is both more and less forgivable than knowing. The family listed the cabin 14 months after completion. A good time to sell, according to the market. The listing looked great. The photos were beautiful. The cabin was genuinely well built, because I had built it. Standard in a real estate sale, the buyer orders an inspection. The inspector examines the property and also reviews the permit history, checking that the work was done properly, that inspections were passed, that there are no open or failed permits in the county records. I knew the permit history was clean. I'd made sure of it. What I hadn't thought about was the specific moment when the inspection report landed in front of the family, because I hadn't been part of the sale discussions. Marco was handling it, naturally, because Marco handled the visible parts of everything related to the cabin. The inspector's report listed all 4 major permits. For each one it noted, permit closed, final inspection passed, contractor of record, Sophia Torres, license hashtag. Marco called me when he read it. And his voice had the quality of a person who has just understood something that has been true for 2 years. He said, "Your name is on all the permits." And I said, "Yes." He said, "All 4. And I said, "Foundation, roof, plumbing, electrical. Every major system." He was quiet. And then he said, "I told everyone I built it." And I said, "I know." He said, "Did you plan this? Were you waiting for the sale?" And I said the sentence I'd say again exactly the same way. I said, "Marco, I didn't plan anything. Permits are public record. I pulled them because I'm a licensed contractor and that's the law, and because I wasn't going to put my license on work that wasn't done correctly. I didn't tell you your name would be on them, because your name was never going to be on them, you're not licensed. I also didn't tell you my name was on them, because you didn't ask. You spent 2 years telling people you built the cabin. The inspector just told the buyer what the county has always known. Here is where the story becomes a choice. I had more than the permits. I had invoices, timesheets, inspection records, subcontractor agreements, a complete paper trail of every dollar and hour I'd put into that cabin. If I'd wanted to, I could have made the case that my contribution to the property value was significant enough to warrant compensation out of the sale. I could have called a real estate attorney and had a conversation about contractor liens and unpaid work. I thought about that conversation for about a week. The number wasn't small. But I kept asking what I actually wanted, and the honest answer was not money from the cabin sale. The cabin was my grandfather's. The family's enjoyment of it for 2 summers was real. My parents were proud of it, and that pride, even though it had the wrong name attached, was real too. Taking money out of the sale would have meant taking it from my parents and from the shared memory, and I wasn't willing to do that for a credit dispute. What I wanted was a record. A clean, accurate, permanent record that said the work was mine. I already had it. For permits, a county building department file, an inspector's report. The record existed without my doing anything. The sale just made it readable. So I told Marco, I'm not claiming anything from the sale. What I am going to do is be accurate about what I did, going forward, when it comes up. Not to embarrass him, because I'm telling it as a story about the cabin, not about him. But I'm done being absent from my own work. He said, that's fair. And I believed he meant it. The sale closed. The family distributed the proceeds. My parents got their share and were grateful and bought a new car and called it the cabin money, which it was. Marco and I have talked about it twice since. The first time he apologized, a real one, clean, no frame around it. He said, I took something from you and I didn't even see I was doing it. That landed. The second time, about 6 months later, he called because he had a friend who needed a contractor for a renovation and wanted a recommendation. He said, I told him my sister is the best contractor I know, and that I'm only saying that because I watched her work for 18 months and I know what I'm talking about. That also landed, differently. My parents took the longest, because their map of the cabin story had to be rebuilt from the foundation, which is appropriate given that I rebuilt their actual foundation. My mother called me and said, I told people Marco built it. And I said, I know. And she said, why didn't you correct us? And I said, because you were proud and the cabin was real and the work was good and none of that required anyone to change the story while it was happening. It just required the permits to tell the truth when the inspector asked. She said, the permits. And I said, the permits always had my name on them, Mom. I pulled them in month 1. You could have looked any time. I keep one of the permit documents on my desk now. Not the final inspection report, that's in the project file. The first permit. Foundation repair. My name and license number in the contractor field, stamped and dated from month 1, before Marco had painted a single wall or told a single story. Because that permit is the thing that was actually true from the beginning. My family could tell the story of Marco building the cabin. They could toast him at the completion party and tell neighbors he'd done it from the ground up. They could not, in the end, argue with a county record. He said he built it. It turned out the building department had always known who actually did. So if there's someone in your life who's standing in front of your work and calling it theirs, who's been louder about a project than you've been, and gotten the credit because volume looks like effort from a distance, ask yourself one thing tonight. Where are the permits? Where is the paper, the record, the file that the system requires to be accurate even when the stories aren't? Because the stories get told at dinners. The records get found at inspections. And the inspection always comes. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: do the real work and keep the real record. Not because you expect to be disputed, because the record is the only version of the story that doesn't depend on memory, and memory has a way of reshaping itself around whoever was loudest in the room. Be the one who signed the permit. The rest takes care of itself.